changes over time and things like that. Here's a really good example of this. Skipping ahead. Here is my current dashboard. And you can actually see my live sensors at home. I'm going to turn on my office lamp. On, off, on. Hopefully my dog sleeping in the office isn't very weirded out right now. But yeah, so this is kind of the dashboard. And you can kind of break it down by certain things. Here's a little candy cane for my Christmas lights. They're currently off and in a box. But yeah, you can control pretty much anything from the dashboard. So integrations. This is really where Home Assistant shines. And this is what made it so lucrative to me in the first place. So Home Assistant kind of has this open ecosystem that anyone can contribute an integration that works with some other device. So it covers anything from 3D printers to vacuum cleaners, garage door openers. You can even download the data from your car. If you have a Subaru or a Mazda or something like that that has like OnStar or those fancy connected things, you can download the data and watch your car. Some electric cars have integrations where you can actually see the charge level of your car as it's in your garage charging, if you're interested. Those integrations are numerous. There are pretty much any kind of integration that you could think of, it's listed here. There's over 2,424 as of today. So this will be anything from Amazon Alexa to Apple iTunes. I'm just going to keep scrolling here. You can see if you have anything that your favorite or anything that you're interested in. So yeah, so lots and lots of integrations that allow you to do actions or integrate with things that you're using. Devices and entities sounds really nebulous and complicated, but really, at the end of the day, within Home Assistant, you have two different categories of things. You have devices, which would be like a cell phone, or a motion sensor, or a light sensor. And the entities would be the things that the device has. So your motion sensor would have an entity that's motion status, light status, battery level, things like that. So it kind of groups all of these entities within a device, and then that's how Home Assistant kind of groups things up. Based on each of those metrics, you could trigger on certain events, like if a battery level on a sensor goes low, then it sends an alert to Slack, so on and so forth. And automations, these are the fun part. This is more or less the fun part of Home Assistant. It's really where kind of all the action happens. They really break it down into three different categories. You have a trigger, which is something that starts your automation. If your battery level goes below a certain threshold, if motion is detected, or if somebody rings your doorbell. The conditions would be when, where, how you want to make sure that that works. If your Ring doorbell detects motion at 11:30 at night, you probably maybe want to know about it. But if your battery level goes low, you don't want Slack pinging you 100 times a minute because the battery is low at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then the actions would be actually what the automation does. So send an alert, do this, do that. And that's how each of the things are broken down. I liken it to cron, but for Internet of Things. Some examples for automations. Like I said, your battery alert, for example. Another cool one is Christmas lights. The traditional thing is you have those terrible timers that you plug in and you have to set the hour and things like that. For example, here, 30 minutes before the sun sets. That's a trigger. So that time shifts quite a bit during the winter. It could be as early as 4:30 in some cases. 30 minutes before the sun sets, turn your Christmas lights on. And then turn them off in the morning or something like that. Doorbell coverage. This is one I use all the time. If you have Wi-Fi speakers or something that can play audio connected to your network, someone rings your doorbell, your speakers will announce someone's at the door. I have some speakers in my backyard in my shed, so if someone rings the doorbell in front of the house, I can know if that happens while I'm out in the backyard in the shed. This last one here, fix a dark office. You can have a lamp turn on if it gets too dim. Keep that in mind, we're actually going to use that as an example here later. The other cool thing is you can have it do stuff like based on an action. So push a button, get something. Does anyone, excuse me, do you remember those Amazon buttons from a while ago where you would order stuff?
Dash buttons.
Dash buttons, that's exactly it. So what you could actually do with Home Assistant is, you could have the equivalent of this, push a button, order a Domino's pizza if you want. You don't have to, but it's cool to have the idea that you do this. Think of it like an emergency panic button on a Friday night. Ah, pizza. So, security. This is kind of the elephant in the room. The big conversation a lot of people have with Internet of Things is, yeah, well, how secure is it? You have all these different apps that are on your phone, collecting data, potentially sending data to who knows where, things like that. Home Assistant, in my opinion, kind of stands out from this pack because it's made specifically to live locally to your internet, or to your intranet, your local network, and not necessarily have to go out to the rest of the internet. Local control, all sorts of direct access. So rather than talking to any kind of external servers, dependent on those external servers, you can control it locally. What happens if, heaven forbid, Philips Hue gets discontinued? Anybody that has those devices, dependent on those servers, their lights don't work. What happens if Amazon goes down? AWS East. All of a sudden, you can't turn on your lights? That's kind of stupid. Home Assistant kind of works around this by using local control and communicating directly with those devices so that you're not dependent on Amazon or any of those external services. Additionally, if those services are discontinued, you can continue doing that with the direct communication. So it helps, if you kind of do a little bit of research and look into things like this, and you're familiar with how Home Assistant can directly integrate with some of these devices. If you make a conscious choice to select something that has better local support. So how does Home Assistant kind of classify their things? They actually classify their integrations into 4 different categories. There's local push and pull. Local push is kind of the gold standard. Philips Hue is a good example of this, where the device, if you have your radio built in Zigbee or whatever it's called, Z-Wave, it will communicate directly with the light bulb and turn it on. It's not dependent on any of these services. Local pull, kind of similar, but Home Assistant will have to ask the device for its status rather than communicating with it directly. Cloud push and cloud pull, slightly less great, but still wonderful, because these depend on actual communication over the internet. In some cases, that's unavoidable. Like if you're triggering on something that, if somebody pushes to a GitHub repository, obviously you need to connect to the internet to talk to GitHub. You don't have a GitHub server in your house. I hope not. But yeah, so yeah, you have these different types of communication levels. So, demo of Home Assistant. As I showed here before, Home Assistant is pretty cool. Here's a simple dashboard. Here's a dashboard of everything. Shows all of your sensors. If you choose to have an integration that monitors energy, for example, like a smart plug that will show the current and amperage and things like that, you'd actually see how much power you're using over the course of a day. Solar panels, if they're internet connected, you'll actually see your power generation, and it's all kept locally. You don't have to go talk to a server. Yeah, it's very easy to go in and look at all of your different integrations and different things like that. We'll talk about creating some automations here in just a moment, but most of it is just kind of point and click and choose the options. You don't actually have to know a lot of programming. So if you were eagle-eyed and you were looking here, you could see some of these home sensors here. Some for my office. Here's one that shows light levels within my office, for example. You may be wondering, well, how do you get those types of data? My answer is you create your own sensors. ESP Home is a project that is sponsored, directed, kind of managed by the same group that also directs Home Assistant. ESP Home, its singular goal is to make a very easy to use platform for plug and play sensors. You quite literally follow the little graph, grab a device, write like 6 lines of code, and all of a sudden you have all of your information in Home Assistant. So it's very tightly integrated with Home Assistant, and the fact that they use very inexpensive jelly bean parts makes it very lucrative for making your own. So let's talk through an example. I showed that luminance sensor, a light level sensor. Let's talk through actually creating one. So first of all, you need the brains. You need something that connects to the internet. So that could be anything from an ESP32, an ESP8266, or a Raspberry Pi RP2040, which is slightly easier to get than an actual Raspberry Pi. These are all internet-enabled microcontrollers. Here's an example on Adafruit from Friday, I think? Thursday, Friday. There are 34 of these ESP32s in stock for the low price of $9.95. So they're very inexpensive to obtain. If you look on Amazon, I'm sure you can find them much cheaper, but I like Adafruit.
What's the website?
Adafruit. Adafruit.org. I'll drop a link later.
And they're supporting the C3 version already?
I think so. So next, after you have your controller, you need some sort of sensor. So this could be quite literally any sort of sensor that you could think of. There are integrations with devices like AirThings. You can get like a motion sensor, a weight sensor. If you're familiar with like those little magnets that go on windows, you can have a magnet sensor, weight sensor, motion detection, power, distance, like ultrasound distance measurements. Any of these devices you can find, very inexpensively. This one is $4.50, and it's the kind of Cadillac model of the light sensors. Really, the only thing that you need in this case would be the chip, which is right there. That's a light sensor. It's a little glass circuit board, and then you need the pins to connect it to your device. So you get this, you get the other one. You could actually buy pre-made wires that have little connectors on each end that work with these pins. So you just slide them on. You don't have to do any soldering. You don't have to do anything complicated like that. And then you go into ESP Home. So who here could probably figure out how to write 20 lines of code? Or copy and paste 20 lines of code. So it's pretty easy. So ESP Home, their documentation on their website is wonderful. They literally give you full working examples on how to use any of the devices that it supports. In this case, I'm going to talk through our example. So I'm just going to give it a name, and I'm going to say what kind of ESP32 board I'm using. This is all literally just copy and pasted from the site. I have some extra options here to hook it up to Home Assistant and then set up over-the-air updates, so you don't actually have to plug it into a computer. It could be stuck on a wall, plugged into the outlet, and you literally never have to take it down. Whenever there's an update, you just click the button and away it goes. Here's your Wi-Fi. It's all defined with secrets, so you can have the same Wi-Fi password for all of your devices, and if you update your Wi-Fi password, you don't have to go into all of these devices. You just update the secret. So these last two sections, here's how the connection is set up to the sensor. So we're saying these two pins on the microcontroller are what we're using, and then this is the device we're using. And if you come back here, here's SCL and SDA. So you literally just hook up SCL and SDA to whichever pin is labeled that number on your device. So that's it. You plug it, 2 minutes later, you're done. And after all of that, you have a wonderful device living in ESP Home. And as a wonderful fact, I'm going to show how to update this wirelessly. So I'm connected to my VPN at home. And I'm looking at this device, so I'm going to update the luminance sensor in my office.
What's updating? Is it?
So ESP Home frequently has updates that support new devices, reduce memory usage on the ESP32 devices, things like that. So there's a number of bug fixes and things. I didn't actually look at the changelog, I probably should have. But yeah, so this wireless update will do is just kind of make sure that it's running the latest version of the firmware.
Of their stuff.
So, of their stuff. So you get your firmware updates managed yourself. Go ahead.
I'm assuming a lot of C and C++. I'm assuming a lot of Home Assistant's written in C++ then, or?
Some of it, yeah. This is technically because of the way that they use the ESP32 devices, but you know, the actual Home Assistant software, I think the front end's written in React, if I'm familiar, if I'm correct. But yeah, Python-based.
Okay, alright.
So cool stuff. So there, it finished. All I did was I clicked one button and I updated the firmware. You probably have a lot more complicated process for that for Philips Hue or something like that. But right there we go. And you can actually see it's connected to my network and it connected to Home Assistant. And in a couple seconds, we'll probably see how bright it is in my office. There it is, right there. So 36,000 lumens, which is awfully bright. I think that's
It's the dog.
probably.
There's a party going on, and the dog's leaving.
So we have this sensor, this is great. We're collecting all this data into Home Assistant, but how can we use it usefully? So in this case, we have a luminance sensor. This is the exact copy from Home Assistant of my automation for my office lamps. So the trigger, in this case, would be 1.5 hours before the sun sets, which varies. Now it's, what, 8 o'clock or something like that, but in the middle of December it's 4. What a depressing time that is. If the time is 8 a.m., so the start of my general workday, or the sensor that we were just playing with triggers an event. So if the sensor itself says, hey, Home Assistant, you should do something, then it'll trigger the automation. The conditions which limit this would be between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. on a weekday. I don't want my office light turned on if I'm not in the office working, so keep it just during work hours. If the sensor has been dimmed or below the threshold for 15 minutes, if a passing cloud goes by, I don't want my light going on and off and on and off like a Hollywood sign or something. And do a sanity check to make sure my lamps are already off. So if they're already off, turn them on. And then do that, turn my lamps on. And we can actually see that in Home Assistant if you want. It's really just kind of a retelling of what I just did. But here's automations and low light lamp trigger. Here they are. So it's all kind of Lego-like. You just kind of click and follow the prompts. And if we want to add a separate trigger, there could be anything from a calendar date, if you want to base it on geolocation. Here's an example. If you're leaving your office and it takes you 20 minutes to come home, you want to turn on the air conditioner on your way home, you can do that. So when you leave a geolocation point, trigger an event. So on and so forth. You can even trigger it on webhooks. So the web developers here are salivating, thinking about sending a Slack message to your house and turning on, opening your garage door based on a Slack message or something like that.
I was thinking you pushed commit to GitHub so you get 5 minutes of lamp time.
There you go. If your home automation, or if your GitHub PR has any CI test failures, then the red light goes on. Send alert. Good.
Yeah, this is connecting, your lamp is connected to the outlet, but before the outlet, there's a device that plugs into it.
Correct. So there is, it is, where are we at here? Simple. There is a Belkin Wemo, I think it is. Where are we at here? Device info. So this is actually, a Belkin Wemo plug. They're, what, like $5 or something like that. I got them on sale from Target. And in the outlet, you plug the Belkin Wemo in, and then you plug the lamp into that, and let Home Assistant do the rest.
Is there something on there that tells you what kind of service that is? That that's an internet connected service, or that's something?
Yes. So each of these devices, let me go in here. So you go into Devices and Services. So here are all the integrations that I have enabled in my house. Please don't hack me. So you can see here's the Belkin Wemos that control my lamp in my office, but here's my printer. Google Cast. Here's another integration for the printer. Here's my phone. National Weather Service has one, so that I can actually trigger on weather. So if it's, if there's thunderstorms forecast, then do something on that. Pi-hole, Slack, transmission, downloading my Linux ISOs. Definitely not piracy. Uptime robot, Dream Machine with Unify, so on and so forth. So lots of different devices and integrations, and you can actually see how these break down. So there's one printer and 8 entities for that. So the printer has all these entities, which would be how much toner is remaining, the drum. So I actually have an automation here for printer life, so that if I get, my printer toner is running out, it'll do stuff and it'll let me know. Stuff. Good.
Super random question. Do you click on a dashboard for your Home Assistant too?
I do.
Is it AWS managed Grafana?
No, it's in Docker. No, it's in Docker. So, that's really kind of the gist of it. I've only really kind of scraped the surface of what you can do. There's a ton of extra customization, especially with devices like the Home Assistant Yellow. I'm still salty. I'm waiting on my CM4 to actually control this. But once you plug it in, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. And I hope that you kind of warmed up to the idea of doing home automation, because Home Assistant, in my opinion, kind of makes it very easy to have offline, locally managed home automation that doesn't necessarily talk to everyone all over the place. Creating your own sensors to do stuff is super cheap, super inexpensive. That light sensor that we talked about and I showed how to make, a similar one if you were to buy it from Amazon would be upwards of $100. And with those two things, plus some wires, we're looking at $20 all set from Adafruit. So yeah.
So do you have this hooked into your UPS to initiate shutdowns? Do you have automation from that?
I do, actually. So Home Assistant has integration with NUT, which is Network UPS Tools. So you could do things like that. I actually get Slack alerts if my power goes out, which is pretty funny. But yeah, so there's lots of things that you can do. I'm happy to demo any other things if you're interested. The final takeaway, sorry Jason, 1 second. So the final takeaway I want to say is, this is a good way to make sure that your devices just work. You're not dependent on external services, you're not dependent on Amazon, AWS East being up. You could flip that switch, hit that button on your wall, and it will just work. And as long as you make sure that your thing is plugged in or it's still working, you know, it hasn't been eaten by your dog or something, it'll just work, it'll continue to work, and it'll stay that way, not dependent on anyone else.
Your Slack notifications, or is that not reporting to HAS and then sending out the Slack for that?
So the Slack integration is what they call a cloud pull level integration. So Home Assistant itself is generating the HTTP put, and it is sending it to Slack. So,
What's your notification for your power is up? Is that coming off of your UPS?
yes.
through that?
So when the UPS, so the actual automation, I pull it up here. So when the state changes in my UPS, then it will trigger an event that will send a Slack notification. So if I go here to automations and scenes, why can't I find it?
The dog.
Yeah, it's definitely here somewhere. Let me go to NUT itself. I'm seeing behind the curtain of the well-rehearsed. Anyway, so here's the status data. And when that status changes between online and offline or on power or battery backup, it'll actually trigger an alert that Home Assistant sends the request out. So my modem is naturally plugged into the battery backup, so hopefully it'll stay online for the 10 seconds it takes to actually send that message.
Till the battery fails.
But if the battery fails, then yeah. So yeah. So I mean, there's definitely ways that you can improve it, but there's minimal viable product as well.
So like myself, I have an IoT bot, which runs on ESP as well.
Mhm.
So in the event that my UPS hasn't triggered properly, I am able to do that.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's definitely one way to kind of work around that. Cool. Any other questions?
So we're using, DNS or using cloud for the,
So this is where I'm a little lazy. So I have my own domain and I just do it that way. But I just connect with my VPN and go that way.
Yeah, so, I mean, I played with this like years ago, and it was very immature back then. So I was
Yes.
wondering like about the robustness of it lately, and like how much time it takes to manage the system. Because, it sounds like you have a family, I have people that live with, and if the lights are not working, and I'm at a conference, my people at home are not gonna be happy. So like, I just kind of like, what is
Exactly.
your experience with
So
far?
that's a very astute observation. A couple of years ago, I would not say this is ready at all. They've made really good progress in the past couple of years to kind of break things along. I don't know if anyone follows Jeff Geerling at all. He's a YouTube guy, but he did a video on Home Assistant almost a year ago, I guess. And his fumbling through it was pretty indicative of the common user experience at the time. They've since kind of used that as like a oh no, we probably should fix this kind of moment. So since then, they've really improved kind of the workflow and how things work. So it's pretty stable. Currently, I'm running the Docker container. I've touched it once in the past couple months, just because I need to tweak a setting, and that's
And then
a
like
weird.
the the sensors and stuff that you were updating, like, is that?
Once a month, maybe. As you could have seen, there were a couple updates pending on some of those that I'm not super religious about actually updating the sensors because they're on my land, they're not talking to the internet. Unless I have someone, my threat model is, unless someone's on my network trying to hack my ESP devices, they have to know a lot more than that. So, I'm not super concerned about it. But.
What kind of security layers are there? And I'm not thinking so much about hackers from Chile trying to get into your system, but can you define roles of different user accounts for your system? So, for example, your dog wouldn't have access to the lights in your room. He might only be able to activate his, the water and treat bin or something.
Exactly, yeah. So there are multiple users within Home Assistant. You could have, someone that could just view, someone that could have just access to certain integrations, and kind of limit it that way. So it's not super fine grained, but there are different levels that you could have for each user. Trying to go in order here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I played with Home System a while back as well. 2 questions. How do you integrate like light control with your local control so that you still have a switch?
That's a very good question. And so I've thought about this quite a bit because I'm the type of person, if you have 2 switches that control the lights, one has to be in a certain position, and I'm very anal about that. There's a way you could use, for example, Lutron makes a product line called Cassetta, I think it's pronounced. They're more or less just internet-controlled buttons. So you could link the state of those buttons to the actual device that's being controlled. So if you open the app and you turn the light on, then the switch on the wall also gets updated with that state. And that's kind of how it ties it all together.
Yeah, then the other question I had, have you played with cameras in it recently?
A little bit. So I have Unify stuff. I have Unify Protect integration, so it does connect to the cameras, but I haven't really played around with automations based on the camera settings.
When I played with that a couple years ago, a year or 2 ago, I had up to like 5 minutes of lag between the camera and what I was seeing on the dashboard.
Wow, okay.
So,
Yeah,
just
I'm
curious
not,
if they got that.
I haven't noticed that big of a lag. It's pretty accurate. I think they use real-time streaming protocol, but yeah, seems good. Yeah.
2 questions. I'm assuming you're committing the configuration to GitHub or something the like to track it.
In some cases, yeah. So I do have. Let me show the actual end slide here. I do have example configurations for ESP Home on GitHub. If you want to scan that, I promise it's not a Rickroll. But yeah, if you're interested, I do have some example configurations there for ESP devices.
Yeah.
If you're interested. But
That's cool. And the second question, in relation to home automation as opposed to just straight home assistant, what's your thought on physical security and tying that to automation? So smart locks and like the garage door, like you said, right?
Yes. So that's a super good question, and it really depends on your own personal preferences. And I think that's what's really cool about Home Assistant, because you can kind of pick and choose what devices get on the internet and get controlled by those. I'm comfortable enough with kind of my neighbors and my neighborhood that I have my garage door openers tied to Home Assistant. Because I personally find the level of insight that provides kind of outweighs the potential security problems. So, it really depends on what you want. There is a way, if you're really security conscious, you could use ESP devices to actually control those. They'll actually kind of trigger the button yourself. So, if you want that completely offline, completely local control, you can do that.
That's cool.
You don't have to depend on Chamberlain or whoever, Liftmaster.
I noticed one of the tabs that you had earlier was the logbook. What exactly is that?
Good question. So I'll show that very quickly. So logbook is basically just the events that happen in the house. So anything that Home Assistant controls, it'll show the history of that. So you know, if you have, you know, multiple things occurring at once, you can actually track that down.
So how would it show like, if something was turned on manually versus like if it was turned on like, through, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.